it could be a significant problem going forward.
Well, with more on the verdict and what we can expect, criminal defense attorney E.J. Apt and Robert Bianchi, trial attorney, criminal defense attorney, and former prosecutor. Good to see you both. You know, Robert, I was reporting on this case, so I followed it very closely, and it struck me that, wow, this was a tough sell for the defense. The defense attorney trying to tell the jurors, well, you know, my client created Silk Road, but then he handed it off to a bunch of nefarious people, knew nothing about the $200 million in drug sales, and then when the real criminals kind of found out the feds were moving in, then they framed him. They brought him back in and framed him. Wow, that's a tough story for anybody to buy, isn't it?
Yeah, listen, I mean, as prosecutors, when we're presenting a case, we're always cognizant of the idea, and I agree with the defense attorney, we have to be very careful with computer crime cases when we prosecute them because there are nefarious ways that it can be made to look like somebody else. However, the facts and the rule of common sense will always rise to the level with jurors. In this case, you have him caught with the computer. You have him caught with the evidence. You have a friend who testified that he helped set him up. And more importantly, you have journal entries that were written by the defendant where he's essentially confessing and admitting that he knew he was doing something wrong. So when you combine the investigative data that was going on, the undercover agent that was working with him online,
I think it's a little more excuse me, I think it's a little more complicated than that, because there's going to be a lot of grounds for appeal here.
Right.
I think for the first problem, there are going to be really three major reasons for appeal. First, you've got a judge who limits the defense's ability. They ties their hands in trying to put up this defense that it wasn't him and that it was other people on the internet who were actually controlling the Tor and Bitcoin network that was this underground Silk Road. And by the judge not allowing those witnesses to testify, she's limiting the defense's theory, so that creates a grounds for appeal. The second problem is there's going to be a huge Fourth Amendment issue that comes out of this case because the FBI, this is the hackers being hacked by other hackers. What happens here is, the way that the FBI found out that it was Mr. Ulbricht is that the FBI used its own hackers to hack into Tor and realize that the servers were in Iceland and trace it back to Mr. Ulbricht in San Francisco.
Yeah, but look,
and they did all this
that was an undercover sort of sting operation, Jay. I mean, that happens in every case, regardless of whether it's
they did it without a warrant,
internet that's
and
involved.
you're talking about technical constitutional issues here, and I'm not disagreeing that ultimately the privacy interests will be looked into. But the question here is with regard to the evidence that this jury had. Whenever a judge excludes evidence, it's going to be reviewed on appeal. But if the judge felt that that evidence wasn't relevant and that the defense wasn't entitled to present it, then eventually down the road, the appellate courts or the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeal will not reverse this. However, if the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals felt he was denied an opportunity to do a proper defense, it will. But remember, on appeal, it's not a retrial. It's whether or not there was an egregious error in the judge's ruling. And with the copious amount of evidence, the judge could say, on
Jay,
appeal, this is important. They
I don't want to get too much in the weeds on Fourth Amendment stuff because people's eyes are going to glaze over.
Absolutely.
But one of the most powerful things that I think struck these jurors is that when they nabbed Ulbricht in the San Francisco Public Library, he was logged on as the Dread Pirate Roberts, which was the pseudonym of the individual operating some $200 million in drug transactions. I mean, talk about getting caught red-handed, Jay.
Well, I think that does bring up a good point. I think even though there's been a conviction now of Ulbricht, you're going to see a lot of copycat crimes. I think this is just going to be the first case in many where there's going to be a huge underground network on the internet for selling and buying illegal narcotics. This was $180 million over 3 years. Ulbricht himself made $18 million. That creates a huge financial incentive for people who are in the underground or organized crime to do a lot of copycatting. And I think we're just cutting the iceberg.
And you know, Robert, I mean, Ulbricht's got other problems. He is indicted in a Baltimore federal court for using bitcoins to allegedly hire killers to murder people that he felt, you know, were against him and against his business. So Ulbricht's facing a long legal road, isn't he?
Yeah, listen, I think that evidence is also very significant when you look at it, that he's indicating that he had nothing to do with this. He was trying to cover it up. He was soliciting people with regard to people that could have exposed him. And like you said, the most powerful evidence many times is catching him red-handed. These investigators did a great job. I've investigated and prosecuted many computer crimes, and the problem is the cops don't wait, or investigators don't wait until they actually catch them red-handed. In this case, with all that data and the data you just mentioned right now, that he's actually looking to solicit to kill people who may be against his business interest is a huge problem.
Yeah, guys, we got to go because we're out of time here. But remember, if you're doing crime on the internet, you always leave a digital fingerprint. Right, Jay Apt, Robert Bianchi, good to see you guys. Thanks.